you doing? In case we haven't met, my name is Emma, I'm a pencil artist, and these are some of my drawings. So today I'm going to talk about how to draw hyper-realistic blonde hair, which I personally think is maybe one of the easier types of hair to draw. So it's a really nice place to start. And something really important that you're going to see throughout this video is that the way I draw, regardless of what I draw, is often the same process behind everything. So even though I'm talking about hair today, you can take what I'm talking about here and you could go and apply it to something else. Let's begin by introducing you to the drawing. The drawing in question is actually a self-portrait that I did in 2023. And here's the time lapse that I filmed while I was doing the drawing. This drawing, I think, took me about 80 hours. I can't actually remember. I should have checked before. I should have checked. Something like 80 hours. I don't know. And the process that I use, I'm going to just tell you it right now, and then we're going to go over it again and again and again. The process I use is we start by doing an outline. And for me, for really big drawings like this, I tend to use the grid method. And I don't even draw full grid lines in. I actually do little dots, so you can't really see the grid, which is really nice. It makes the drawing process feel a little bit more free and a bit less rigid. Once the grid is in, we put tones down, which is basically a bunch of shading. It's happening right now on the cheek there. That's just tones. And then once the tones are in, we start to build up all the details on top. On the nose, we've got tones, there's no details, and then we add the details. Outline, tones, details. This is always the really broad brush strokes approach. Now, of course, there's way more stuff going on there, but it's really important to remember outline, tones, details. We always do things in that order, except for some really exceptional circumstances that we're not going to talk about today. In most cases, this is how we're going about things. So now you have an idea of the drawing in question. Let's begin at the beginning with the outline. I've started to put some of the outline in already. There's a very faint dotted grid. You probably can't actually see it. So if you're interested, when I add that grid, I'm often using a very hard pencil, like a 2H or something, and it's quite blunt, and that means that it doesn't show very strongly on the drawing, which is really nice. And it's important that you don't push down hard, because then you dent into the paper, and then once you've dented into the paper, you can't undo that. So that's something really important about drawing the grid. The main thing that I would draw in the outlining process of drawing hair is areas of notable shadow, first of all, because that's really what gives the hair its shape. So in this instance, you can see I've added these sort of areas of shadow. They're not going to look like that later. But for now, I just add these kind of abstract shapes, kind of triangles, wonky rhombus kind of shapes, that sort of thing, teardrop shapes. And I fill those in with tone, which is called blocking. We just block in areas of tone. And this might want to be even darker, but for now we can just see that's where the shadows are. And the next thing I do is I do that blocking again, but for the rest of the hair. Now you might be wondering, well, this is blonde hair, it's really light, so why are you shading it in? You're going to see why. It's super important that you put tone down, even when you're drawing something that looks really, really light or even white. So I'm adding more blocking here and I'm blending it. So I'm doing some shading and then I'm blending. I'm building up a few layers. By layering up shading, you get a really lovely smooth base on which to build your details later. So that's why I do it in lots of layers. And now we start adding details. And to add these details, I'm using an eraser. And the eraser that I specifically use is a Tombow Mono Zero, if you're curious. It's a really, really good tool. And I would say if you're ever exploring any kind of realism at all, you're going to want to get one of these Tombow Mono Zero erasers. They're excellent. Again, if you're curious, for the background, I use Staedtler Mars Lumograph Black pencils, and I use 8B for my backgrounds, adding in a few little flyaway hairs there. And back to the body of the hair here, you can see how quickly we've built up this hair texture. It's actually surprisingly quick if you put the tonal values down first and then just add literally some lines. These is literally just lines over the top. You've suddenly got quite a realistic feeling hair texture. So let's carry on. Little flyaway hairs along the side there. And now at the very end, so I've added all these little details in. At the very end, I start to add these little flyaway hairs over the top. Can you see like this one here that was just added in? And then a couple more. And then I'm going to go back and add even more later. And I'll show you later on some footage of me doing that as well, because it's quite interesting. Okay, let's do it one more time on the other side. So you can see I'm outlining these abstract areas. I'm looking for shadows. So for example, I can show you here. Do you see this little shape? This is a little shadow, and it would be roughly like, do you see this here? It just looks like a little shadow now, but when I'm doing the outline, I will actually give it a shape. This one here, for example, we can think of like almost like a teardrop shape. It would probably look something like this shape here to draw something like that. So you're just looking for any kind of shape that you can add to your drawing to help you find that shadow later. So I'm adding in these shapes here, and then we're going to block them in. Basically shade them in or colour them in. And then we're going to block in the hair around them. And the hair on this side is a bit darker. So that shading is a bit darker. And then we've got the tones in. You see we've got all the tones in. And now it's time to add the details. And you can see that a lot of these are just lines. In their simplest form, there's a little bit of shaping to them, but in their simplest form, they are literally just erased lines. And then we're adding those little flyaway hairs at the very end. You see how they kind of add another layer on top, another dimension to the hair, making it feel even more 3D because they're sitting in front of everything else that we've just drawn. This section is really important. I'm going to say something about little flyaway hairs as well. We'll see them later on in the video, but these little hairs are so tempting to draw early on. Just like eyelashes. I see lots of people drawing eyelashes right at the beginning. You shouldn't do it. If you want to get a really realistic looking drawing, you put all your tones down first. You get all of the groundwork in, and eyelashes and little flyaway hairs like these, they go in at the end. It's a difficult way to think about it, especially because this is the really fun bit, right? Doing these lovely little hairs and little eyelashes and eyebrows and all these little twinkly details. That is the fun part, and we want to do it first, but you have to do it last. If you want it to look realistic, you've got to hold off and do it at the end. Now we've got some actual footage of me drawing, which is useful to see. So we've got the outline in, and first of all, I'm blocking in those shadow areas. I'm just shading them in. And something noteworthy about the way I shade these in is I'm shading in the direction that the hair moves. So if you think the hair is kind of lots of vertical lines, whenever I'm drawing hair, I will shade vertically to mimic that texture. As we blend, we lose a lot of that texture anyway, but I think it's just an easy way to add a little bit of extra texture. This is specific to straight hair. If you're drawing curly hair, you would shade sort of with the direction of the curls, but that's a whole separate matter. And then here's some nice footage of adding those little details. So you can see I'm using the Tombow here, and I'm just drawing lines. And I know it sounds rudimentary and simple, but once you've got the tonal values in, all of that shaded, blended tone, this step is actually surprisingly simple because you can just add these little hairs. Now we do want to shape the hairs a little bit. I tend to start with a lighter pressure, and then I add a tiny bit more pressure in the middle of the hair, and then I taper away at the end, and that gives the hair a little bit more shape. But for the most part, we are just drawing lines. Now this is a step called negative drawing. Negative drawing is where we draw the shadow only and we don't draw the highlight. I don't usually use this technique. It's not usually necessary, but if we have really deep shadow, like we do here, where, you know, we've got some blonde hairs in front of a really dark shadow, I draw that shadow, kind of a dark grey, and then I come back and I fill it in after I've added all the little white hairs in. It's a pretty tedious process, which is why I don't like to do it, and it's not always necessary, but it can look really, really good and add a lot of depth. And then this is adding those tiny little details at the end. A lot of the details I will add with the Tombow, but sometimes there's also graphite details to add. So these are just lots of little hairs sitting in front of that hair tone and detail that we've drawn in already. And then again, little details with the Tombow. And all of these hairs are kind of going not in the direction of the flow of the hair, but sort of across. Here's adding some more kind of background hair texture. You'll notice I'm moving the Tombow up and down, and I'm moving it quite quickly. Often when we're just adding this kind of background texture, a quick pencil stroke, especially on a larger drawing, helps to give the hair a nice consistent flow. If you move your eraser or your pencil really slowly, you can have a bit of a wobbly line. So we want to keep a little bit of speed. And then I'm adding those little flyaway hairs again. You see they're in front of everything else. That hair is sitting right at the front of all of that texture, so we add it in at the end. You've got to resist the temptation to add it in earlier. And here's the finished result. We get a really nice sense of depth to the hair. We have some really nice deep shadows, and then also lots of little flyaway hairs sitting in front that create that 3D effect. We've got the hair that sits behind, we have the little flyaway hairs that sit in front. And that's it. That's how to draw hyperrealistic blonde hair in a nutshell. If you enjoyed this video and if you want to learn how to draw like this, you can learn. Hyperrealistic drawing is not like you're born with it magical talent. It genuinely is a skill set, and you can apply that skill set to your own creative ideas. I know because I teach and I have seen hundreds of students go from all different levels of drawing, some of them genuinely total beginners, through to creating hyperrealistic drawings. If you want more information about that, check out the description below the video. I'm releasing new videos every week, so click the subscribe button and the notification bell, and I really look forward to seeing you on the next one.